Kadesh, and they send they out in the wilderness for 40 years. Chapter 2 picks up, and he says, then we turned, and verse 3, they began to go north. They made their way to Edom, and, God says, why don't you go through Edom, cut a deal with them, say, hey, we'll pay you for any food we eat, anything we drink. Let me just pop up a couple of maps here. So we got a new green laser. So they came down here to Sinai, up to here, to Ezion and Geber, and they made their way to Kadesh. That's where they sinned. So they wander in the wilderness all through here for 40 years, and then they make their way down and around. They're going to come up to Edom. And so God says, I didn't give Edom to you. I gave it to the Edomites. And so they offer them money, but Edom declines and says, no, we're not going to let you get through here. So they got to go around it. I don't know if I can get another. There, keep going here. Okay, so here they're going to go around Edom, and they come around right here on the bottom. They're going to come up through Moab. And God says, don't mess with Moab either. So they cut a deal with them, and they say, hey, we'll pay you. Moab says, no, we're not going to work with you. So they make their way up, and they're going to go into Ammon, same thing. And so the lesson we learned last week was that, God gave the land to Edom, Moab, and Ammon, and they had to fight people to get in there, and they fought giants to get in there. And so there's no reason why, if there's some giants over here, there's no reason why Israel can't knock them off if God let them beat them. So then they're going to come up to Sihon. I don't know if we covered that. Let me get my, I got to move my notes along here. Okay, there's Moab. So that's verse 14, verse 15. So, we talked about the Eoms. That's what the Moabites called these giants. They were giants, and they weren't Nephilim. They were Rephaim. Rephaim, and they were a different group of people, and there were genetic issues, and that's where these giants came from. The same thing, we said midgets. So where did midgets come from? Well, it was genetic issues. That's why we got little people and we got big people, and they're just genetic disorders due to the fall, right, and the breakdown of gene pools. So some of these folks were big. You got some of these European guys, big Europeans today. So these guys were really big, as we'll find out. So we moved our way all the way up through. Then they went into Ammon. It's all kind of the same thing, verse 20. And it always says they were kind of like the Anakims, see, because they never saw this group of people. They knew who the Anakims were, and they were big, so the Jews knew that. So they identified with that. And, so God took care of the region of Edom and Moab and Ammon, and he purged those guys out. Then he gives another, in verse 23, talks about the Avims in Hazarim, and these were the Capharims. And they came from Caphtor, and which was actually goes back to the island of Crete. And these were the Philistines before they were called the Philistines. And they ended up dealing with people out on the lower tip of the Gaza Strip. And so then he says, after giving them all this instruction and exhortation, verse 24, then he gives a commandment, arise ye up, take your journey, pass over Anarn. And he says, I've given into your hand Sihon. He's the king he's an Amorite, and he's the king of Heshbon. So there were different Amorites that were in different areas. Those are here. Amorites were down here. They have them up here and up here. So, and we said Amorite is a very difficult group to define because in ancient Near Eastern literature, they were just anybody that was a Westerner. They called them Amorites. A Jew could be an Amorite. That's what in Babylon, that's what they would call them. You get into biblical literature, and the Amorites sometimes is a catch term for the Canaanites. Sometimes they use it synonymously. And then other times it's actual these tribal groups that are located in the land of Canaan. So God gives them a commandment, tells them to go up and to contend with and to fight with Sihon, the Amorite, king of Heshbon. And what we get out of this whole thing, too, is, God is totally sovereign, and he really determines who's going to live where and when. It doesn't matter if they're Ammon or if they're Moab or who they are. He gave them that land. He determines who gets what land. Acts chapter 17, in verse 26, God has determined the times before appointed and the boundaries of their habitation. He determines all of that. There's no mistake that you were born in this general time period of life, and there's no mistake that he put you right here in Milwaukee County, or if you live in a different county. That God knew right where he wanted you, and he knew the house he wanted you, and he knew the neighbors that he gave you. He designed all this because he's got a bigger purpose in mind other than, hey, this is what I like and this is my comfort. Brother Bill?
You brought up earlier about different people and so on and so forth. Acts 17:26 also says he made us from one blood.
Right, absolutely. We all come from, Adam and Eve, and then down to Noah, right? And then Tower of Babel split everything up, but it all traces back. Yeah, we're all one blood. We're all people, right? Someone said there's only one race, the human race. There's different ethnicities, but there's only one race, right? So thank you, Bill. Good reminder. So down to verse 25, he says, "In this day I will begin to put the dread of thee and the fear of thee upon those nations that are under the heaven. And they shall hear report of thee, and they will tremble and be in anguish." Well, this would happen just not too, later on. Rahab and the whole group in Jericho, they heard, and they were afraid. But, the fear was all out there. And when we did a lesson on biblical archaeology about a year or two ago, we talked about it's called the Soleb inscription. And the Soleb inscription was found in probably Sudan, would be today. And in this, it was written by Amenhotep III. He was a pharaoh, a king. That he wasn't the son of Amenhotep II. That son actually died in the Exodus, but it was his actual fourth son, and they named him the third. And he wrote an inscription. His name was on the inscription, and he talked about, and he used this phrase. This is one of the oldest inscriptions now that they found. And they found it back in the 30s, and then someone else got it back up, and they reread it. And it talked about the problems they were having with the nomads of Yahweh. That's what they called them, the nomads of Yahweh. And well, the liberals come along and well, everybody used the different names of God. Well, no, they didn't. They didn't use Yahweh. But Amenhotep, that family knew Yahweh because his daddy said, "Who are you?" Do you remember that? "Who are you that I should obey? Who's this Yahweh that I should obey you?" And so that family knew Yahweh. And they had some big problems, right? So they had these Jews wandering in the wilderness, and they were nomads. They didn't have a country at the time. And this was written right around 1400, about the time when Joshua would go in. So it's a phenomenal discovery. But this is reflected right here, I think. He's going to put the dread upon all those about who you are. And we got an inscription that actually said that, right? A secular inscription. So it's fun to find those things. Verse 26, Moses said that they actually showed grace to Sihon. And so Moses said that they actually sent out messengers. Verse 26, they sent out messengers to talk to this king, and they tried to cut a deal with him. And he said, "Let me pass through. We'll give you money." Right? He offered this to Edom, Moab, and Ammon. They all turned him down. But God said, "Don't meddle with them. Don't fight them. I gave him that land. Just go around them." Well, he had no deal with this Sihon. He actually was probably just occupying the land. So But they make a deal with him anyway. But verse 30, it says, and Sihon, the king of Heshbon, would not let us pass. For the Lord God, listen to this, hardened his spirit and made his heart obstinate, that he might deliver him into thy hand, as appeareth this day. And so this is the same scenario with Pharaoh, right? It's the same thing. Pharaoh hardened his own heart, but it also says God hardened his heart, and it always happened with grace, right? So God extends grace to Pharaoh and pulls back and stops the plague, and then Pharaoh changes his mind. He hardens his heart further. And so God has been gracious to these Canaanites over the years. He's blessed them. They got a great land. They got great crops. God's blessed them, and so here comes Moses, and Moses offers him more grace, and he says no, and he hardens his heart. Right? And so verse 31, and the Lord said unto me, behold, I have begun to give Sihon and his land before thee, to begin to possess, that thou may inherit the land. And then verse 32, and Sihon came out against it. Moses didn't start the fight. Sihon did. First he says no, and then he says, let's get our guys, we're going to go after him. So he starts the battle. And this is also noted, I believe, in the book of Numbers, chapter 21, 21 through 28. And so more details are given there. Moses is summarizing a lot of stuff in Deuteronomy. But this group gets put under haram judgment by God. Now, God doesn't do that with everyone, but certain peoples, he put them under haram judgment. And it usually translates utterly destroy them. Sometimes it's under the ban. Sometimes it's devoted to destruction. It can translate different ways. But ultimately, it is a divine commandment to destroy and conquer. And so that's what Sihon was under, but he really started the fight. Moses didn't start the fight. Moses showed grace. He took up arms and went at Moses. So that's how the fight started. And so verse 35, they utterly destroy him. Verse 34, they kill the men, the women, the children, everything. They burn everything down. But they save the cattle. So sometimes under haram judgment, they destroy everything. Everything is devoted to God, like we find in Jericho. But in this situation, God allows them to take the spoils because they actually need the spoils. I mean, they're hurting. They need food and they need water, and they got, 2 million Jews, I imagine. I don't know exactly how many they had at this point. At one point they had 2 million, but a lot of them died in the wilderness, so they were a little bit less. But they had a lot to feed. And so verse 34 tells them they did that, and then they kept the cattle, they took the spoils of the city, they needed it. Aroer, which is on the brink, gives you the description to the river Arnon. And then he says here at the end of verse 36, and there was not one city too strong for us. This is the work of God. This was a group of people that were not soldiers. They were not military. And it says, and the Lord God delivered all unto us. And we see this again and again. It was God's doing. God gave them the victory. And oftentimes it says, and, we rose up and we fought, so they weren't passive by any means. They had to come in and they had to fight by faith. They had to trust God, that God was going to give them the victory. And so verse 37, only the land of Ammon was off limits up in that area. God forbade them to go into that area. And so this new territory now that they have right in here. So here's Sihon. So here they are. They were right up at the edge of Moab. And so now they took over this whole region here. There's Ammon. And then next chapter, they're going to come up into this area. There's Bashan, and that's where this Og, he was also an Amorite. And that's where he was king in that area. And they're going to contend with him next as we get into chapter 3. So that's where we're going to go right now. Chapter 3, verse 1, they turned and they went further north in this region. all the way up into Bashan. And Og was the king there, and he came out against us. He and all his people to battle at Edrei. And so here again, Moses didn't start the fight. The Canaanites started the fight. But it says here, verse 2, and the Lord said unto me, fear him not, for I will deliver him and all his people and his land into thy hand. And thou shalt do unto him as thou did unto Sihon, the king of the Amorites, which dwelt in Heshbon. And so the Lord our God delivered into our hands Og, also the king of Bashan, and all his people, and we smote him. So here you see, God delivers it, but then they had to actually pick up weapons. They actually had to go out and actually engage in fighting. So it wasn't passive at all on the Jews' part. They really had to engage. And so the whole time they had to go, well, we got to trust God to do this. So this is what happened. So, folks, this isn't the church, okay? This is a nation, right? These are two different things. We think, oh, yeah, we're supposed to love my neighbor as myself. And no, these people are in occupied territory that God's given to this nation, Israel. And they got a constitution and everything that he wrote up, the Mosaic Law. So they have every right to go in, and they even tried to be nice to them. They wouldn't be nice to them. And they actually attacked the Jews. So this is where it's at. It's a totally different scenario. So they conquer the area, and this is a great strategic. So look at what they have now. If you can just imagine, they're going to go in here, right? There's Jericho. They're going to come in here. Actually, they'll come in right over here to Gilgal, and then they'll come down into Jericho. So Edom and Moab, they're not going to mess with the Jews, right? As long as the Jews don't mess with them, right? Deal. Ammon's not going to do the same thing, right? So they're giving them a green light. You guys can go. We're not going to mess with you. You don't mess with us. So now they take over all of this, right? And this is going to be split up with Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So they got all this. So they're the whole back. They don't have to worry about someone coming from behind and getting us, right? All they got to think about is what's right in front of me. This was a very strategic move, military. It was God that did it, right? They didn't have to think of it. But so they got everything covered from behind. Everything's peace behind. We just got to move forward. So they got to have courage. They got to have boldness. In order to do that, they got to have faith. And so God grants them the victory. So go to verse 4, and it says, and we took all his cities at that time, and there was not a city which we took not from them, 60 cities, 60, it says there in the King James, 60, goes by 20s. And all the region of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. So they had a lot of cities to fight. It wasn't just one little thing. So they're going to all these different cities, and there's some big cities, and there's some little cities, and there's most of them were high-walled cities, but some were just villages, and they didn't even have walls, and I think he notes that also. And so, and we utterly, verse 6, he says, we utterly, again, that is the Hebrew term haram, and they destroyed them as we did Sihon, the king of Heshbon, utterly destroyed the men, the women, the children, every city. This was very common. This is what people did back then. This wasn't, out of the ordinary. It wasn't, they just weren't the first ones that came up and did this. And by the way, these pagans did the very same things to others. And it was just a common way of warfare in that day. I'm drinking tea today. I'm Irish. I usually drink coffee, but my wife, I got this throat thing the last couple of days. So she I don't know what it is, but she had all these she has these jars, This will help, and it did, It's like, oh, I can talk, so it's really good. So I don't know what's in it, I'm just drinking, So. What's that? I think, she said something about marshmallow, and I don't ask any questions, I say, okay, I trust you, so. And it tastes good, and she put honey in it, so I'm like, nice. But I'm more of a coffee guy, actually, so. Okay. All right. So we go. Yeah, right. I thought they put them on graham crackers. Right? All right. So God lets them take the spoils in verse 7. He said, we took all, he doesn't always do that. Here he's saying, yeah, just go ahead and take it. So they take the cattle. And the spoils is anything, money, food, whatever they can get their hands on, clothing, whatever. They take it all. And it says, and we took at that time out of the hand of the two kings of the Amorites. These are all Amorites, Og and Shihon. And so we took out of the hand of the two kings of the Amorites the land. Okay, that was on the east side of the Jordan. He says this side. And from the river Arnon up to Hermon. And Hermon's way up north, up by the Galilee. So all the way up to the, so that's why he's kind of giving a, where am I at? He's kind of getting, so up here would be where that is. So it's right up at the edge here, right near Syria. So they took all of this. It's a whole lot of land they took. And then down to verse, let's see where I'm at here. I'm going to jump down to verse 11. And it says, for only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of the giants. And again, he uses that term. He doesn't say Nephilim, he says Rephaim. And this is a particular group of people. The name actually means a terror. They were terrorizing people. And so, but the King James and others would translate it giants, and they were big. So he tells you he had a bedstead that was made out of iron. And this king got buried in Rabat in Ammon, right there. That's it. That's where they buried him. They killed him up here, and they took him down, and they must have buried him there. I don't know why. That's what they did. Well, he was a big guy. Some people, some theologians say this was his coffin, not his bed. And so I don't know which is which, but they said the same thing could be meant to be that was his coffin. That's what they put him in. Could be, but they give us the dimensions that are here. Maybe they buried him in his bed. Put him in his bed and hauled him off. I don't know. So, and it tells it was 9 cubits of length and 4 cubits of breadth. So it turns out to be 13 and a half feet long. A cubic was 18 inches approximately. And so you got 13 feet long, 13 and a half feet long by 6 feet wide. So he probably wasn't that big, but he had to fit into that. So they had to make it big enough for him to fit in. So, he could have been 12 feet, which, when you think Goliath was what, 9'6", that's not too much bigger, right? So, and Goliath was a Philistine. He wasn't a Canaanite. So there were other giants, obviously, that were around in that time. So we still got giants today. Not too many, but they're still floating around. We got midgets too, by the way. I always like to throw that in. Yeah, brother.
Regarding the spoils,
Yeah.
I understand why that God would have allowed them to take these spoils that were necessary to keep their journey going.
Right.
And in Exodus and through, the area of Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't he allow that subsequent battle with the Canaanites? They did not want them. That was actually a big bone of contention.
Right. Yeah. In certain situations, he allowed it, and then in other, like Jericho, he said it was under the band, and that's how it usually translates. And everything needed to be devoted to God. So they.
Why was that? I mean, why wouldn't he just allow them to have it? Do you have any ideas?
I don't know. Yeah, other than just, God saying you don't need to take any. This is a faith issue. Instead of you take, it's just like when we give to the Lord, right? We give out of the abundance of what we have. We give out of our heart, out of love, and we give a certain percentage. And what we're doing is we're giving to God, but we're trusting that God's going to supply our needs regardless of what we give out. So I think there's the same type of idea there. God's saying, "Give it all to me." Devote everything to me. So we go to the tabernacle. It would go to the work of the ministry. Nobody could take personal possessions when they did that. And it was an issue of faith. God said it. Trust me. Don't take it. And then one of the guys took it. what was the guy's name? Achan. He stole something from Jericho. And boy, everybody knew, right? Because one guy violated it, everybody found out, and then they did lots, and they found out exactly who it was, because nobody was coming forward saying, it was me, right? So it was an issue of faith, and it was God. It was just really just God saying, don't take anything, it's all devoted. Other than that, I don't know if I could think of a reason. Yeah. And I think, again, it puts back on the people, will you obey me? Will you trust me to supply your needs? Heather?
I do know there's two takes that I'm familiar with, and one is the Sethite view, and then one is the angels that fell and genetic manipulation.
Oh, right. Mm.
So I tend towards that there was some sort of genetic manipulation, because why else would God just say annihilate the women, the children? Which
Mhm.
they could sometimes take the women as wives if they chose to, but sometimes they couldn't.
Right.
If there
Mm-hmm.
was a genetic component from some sort of genetic manipulation technology that they were using, he might say it just all has to be destroyed, which is probably why the flood came, because he's gonna have to wipe it all out, otherwise the creation itself wouldn't be able to continue
Right.
with the mark
Mhm.
that he put in it,
Mm-hmm.
because it was marked now by some sort of thing. And I just watched the video about something called a liger, which is when you take a lion and a tiger and you breed them together. And it turns out that if you take the male on one side and the female on the other, you get this liger, and it stops them from having the input information in their genes that tells them to stop growing. So they'll just keep growing
Oh.
and growing. And I kind of wonder if the angels, the Enoch account, which isn't in our canon,
Mhm.
Asher and that, they'll talk about how these angelic beings were giving knowledge to mankind on how to manipulate things. And so
Mhm.
perhaps there was a manipulation. And now there are people who don't believe that. There's
Mhm.
a camp, and that's the second
Right.
view. So I'm respectful of that.
Mhm.
I tend towards
Right.
to believe that
Yeah.
and I see it in our time. I feel
Mhm.
like with the mRNA technology, they are reintroducing, and it did say it would be like the days of Noah.
Mhm.
They're reintroducing things to tamper with and alter the genetic code. And there's even videos that say that our genetic code almost looks like it spells your day bodily. So
Mhm.
to be able to insert genes into that and change that code
Right.
would have something to do with what was occurring with him saying,
Mhm.
you have to wipe them out.
Right.
There was a stiff penalty if you didn't.
Mhm.
And other times where, God has the knowledge to know what
Right.
genetic codes of certain things are.
Yeah.
And it should be.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I would take a different view on that, but I think, this idea of destroying all the Canaanites. So when they first came in, they did this haram judgment, but God mentions in other passages that I'll drive them out little by little. And so a lot of the Canaanites had the opportunity just to leave, right? So the ones who didn't leave and refused to leave, then dug their heels in, then they had to destroy all of them. So it was a lot of Canaanites, they fled north, they went into Phoenicia, up there to Phoenicia and other places. So it wasn't a genocide, it wasn't a total thing like what we think about today. It was a bit different. And so, and then, the thing with, the genetics, again, it is a matter of debate, how you understand that. So I do understand that. I kind of shy away from it just because I think, the issue of God with the flood, he took care of all the Nephilim and he wiped them out. Now, I know you mentioned the other week, maybe one of the wives had some connection to it, possibly, or.
That they understood something and was, because they're doing it now. Do you get what I'm saying? They're taking
Yeah, sure. Through science and through manipulating. Yeah, right.
Somebody found
Mhm.
knowledge or re-retained it or channeled it from, messing around in the demonic realm where they weren't supposed to be, and began to reuse the technology.
Yeah.
So one way or the other.
Sure, and Satan is at large. Satan's trying to get everybody messed up on a lot of different levels, and there's no doubt, the guy that made dynamite made it for good, but Satan got a hold of people that said, hey, we could use this for evil, right? So science makes advances in medical science and things like that, and then ungodly men will take that and twist it. So there's no doubt about that. So, but I tend to think more, the genetic code was breaking down through sin, and you end up with giants, you end up with midgets. You have, because you have to explain the midgets if you explain the giants and things of that nature.
Theories that even in us, that I've heard recently, where if we sin or we don't sin, it was a mark on the genetic code.
Okay.
If you like alcoholism gene and like everything like that, so maybe there's interplay with our behavior that might open something up spiritually in our genetic code that alters the genetic code, because sometimes genes get clipped, sometimes a mutated gene can repair itself. So
Right, yeah, obviously, yeah. And, with alcoholism, you mentioned that. I don't think they've ever found an alcoholic gene. And, same thing, there's not a homosexual gene or anything like that. They have never found those things, but there's no doubt that long-term alcoholism can mess your brain up, and it's going to probably mess up some of that stuff, too. David?
Well, there's tendencies, and God said that he was gonna curse generation after generation, and how does that happen?
Mhm.
Dad was an alcoholic, now the son is an alcoholic, da-da-da.
Right.
So it's a judgment,
Mm-hmm.
and it can't, I don't know if it's in the genetics or in the DNA.
Yeah,
It's something that they experience as they're watching dad,
right,
The
yeah.
son is watching dad, dad's a drinker, now the son becomes a drinker.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's in the DNA, but he's experiencing.
Right. And you mentioned it, I think one of the first things you said, a propensity. Everybody's got a propensity to do something that's sinful. And we're all wired different. And that's just the way, some people have anger issues because they have a tendency to, it's a personality, they're more aggressive. Other people are fearful. Other people,
Yeah, I'm referring to, God says he'll curse. He'll curse other generations, or he'll curse
right, yeah,
generations because you've chosen to,
right.
to disobey.
He does say that, but if you read the rest of the verse, he says, and I bless thousands who follow me. So it's not like, well, I'm cursed, I got to stay. You don't. So we have propensities, and did we get it from our parents? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we learned it in the culture. Maybe we looked at things we shouldn't have looked at, and it created something, and my dad didn't have a problem with that, but I got a problem with it. So you see a mix of it, but everybody's got a propensity to go towards something. Right? The lust comes out of the heart, it says in James. And so even though he says to the third and fourth generation, you could say the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, you can keep going, right? But on the other hand, if you come to know him, he's going to bless you. And so that whole verse has to be taken together, I think.
That part where you said they've never found a homosexual gene,
Correct.
we've all inherited Adam's sin nature, just done it in different ways.
That's right. Absolutely. We're sinners, and we have a propensity towards certain things. And some of this is culture. I mean, they're feeding things into the flesh in our culture that are causing people that maybe have a thought or something like that, and they're like, oh, you must be this, And so undiscerning people and maybe spiritually immature Christians and non-Christians alike, they get sucked into some of these wrong ways of thinking. And it's an identity issue, isn't it? I mean, that's really the whole big thing today is, what is my identity? And, my identity is with Christ. And if you can nail that down. Yeah.
I just want to point
Yeah.
out in Ezekiel, I think it's 18, it's when, God is giving Ezekiel all of his declarations about Jerusalem, and he makes it quite clear that it was the people's choice
Mm-hmm.
to choose sin, and he says, if a father chooses sin, then he will be punished for his sin. If his son chooses
Right.
righteousness, he will
Mhm.
not be punished for his father's sin.
Yeah.
So he makes it quite clear that if you're following the Lord, you're not going to be punished for your parents' sinful nature,
Right.
and vice versa.
Yeah.
So yes, the iniquity will be passed
Yeah.
on to generation to generation, but
Sure.
it's quite obvious
Unless you
choice.
choose not
Right.
to.
That's right.
And
So
that's why
faith.
I think there's something, because certain behaviors might lead to certain conditions, but genetics are always taking information and input from you and deciding how to express themselves. So if you're acting righteously, you're probably programming your genetic code better. But if you're doing things that you know are not good for you, you're programming it to go and get in the opposite direction. Into cancer and all of
Yeah. And a lot of it is just habit, we create, and maybe there's some of that stuff that's, maybe there's some scientific issues that you're saying that are correct, but really a lot of it is, to be more simplistic, we create habits in our life. Some are sinful, and the Bible's real clear. We should put off the old man, put off those sinful habits, and put on the new one. So whether there's genetic things, that could be, but in a simplistic way, we've all learned sinful things and sinful patterns of living. And some of it is in the head and the heart, right? We begin to think a certain way, and we need to go, hey, wait a minute, that's not biblical, right? I need to start thinking about the right things. And if I think about the right things, then I can begin to, angry people are thinking angry thoughts, and anxious people are thinking anxious thoughts. And I need to go back to the Word of God, and I need to say, this is what God says. That's my thought, okay? And that's going to produce what you were talking about, the righteousness, right? We're creating that type of habit.
I think that's why
So-
God probably so protective of the messianic line, being in alignment with his word and certain things. And
Mhm.
he would also, they were straying, and some of them did, they would also have a certain judgment from God. One thing I want to
Mhm.
ask you
Yeah.
about John is, was that a location that Abraham was in at some point?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Well, I think my view, so a lot of people say Abraham came from Babylon, came up and came like through. I think Abraham was Assyrian. I think he lived up there. And I think there's a whole lot of indications biblically.
Joshua later going to Heshbon and divide the camp or something? And on
Yeah.
the side?
Over here? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Valley area in Heshbon?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they get the whole, yeah, they took all of this, except they didn't take Ammon. They took all of this. I got another, here it is. I couldn't get it blown up any bigger. Actually went over I went over my little line here, and then it got funny, so I had to stop. You can only cross a line so far. And then you get in trouble with PowerPoint. So it starts getting crazy, so I had to stop. But you can see, well, here's Damascus, they got all of this. So Manasseh was the younger, but he became the firstborn, remember all that? So he gets a lot of land, and so he gets all of this, and it's going to go into this, I think, in chapter 3. And then Gad and Reuben, so they get all this, but they don't touch Edom, Moab, and Ammon, so they leave that alone. Ephraim's not that big in comparison. Naphtali is pretty good, Asher. But for some reason in the Bible, they'll say the northern kingdom, they'll just nickname it Ephraim, because he was really the first physically born of Joseph, and I think maybe that had something to do with it. But they just call it Ephraim. But he really wasn't the biggest. And then look at Judah down here, man. And Simeon doesn't really Simeon gets certain cities, it says here, he has certain locations because they think Simeon was the one that set the whole Joseph thing up. And because of that, God didn't really give him a lot of land, but he said you kind of fit in and make suburbs out of Judah. But Judah gets a really big chunk, and this is almost as big as what the north is, right? So, but to answer your question, Heather, yeah, they took all of this. So this was Bashan in the Old Testament. So, and they're supposed to have, even God said, you go from the river Egypt, which is down over here.
Where would Giza be roughly in proximity to this area?
Giza in Egypt? Oh, no, that'd be,
Far away.
yeah, it'd be way down. So this is the, yeah, so,
We're going to go from Giza, where you travel east to go to Jerusalem.
oh, yeah, you would. Yeah, you'd have to come right through here. So, yeah, Giza was up in the north, what they called Lower Egypt. So, that's that. I think we have to quit here. David?
Just one more comment. We were in verse 11, and you were talking about them burying the giant on Bethesda.
Yes.
Iron.
Yeah.
And then you said, we have giants still today, and I have some experience with that.
Okay.
I work with the Lemon Brothers. These guys are humongous. And not only that, but when I was in middle school, I was hanging around with a couple of guys at the middle school, and it was kind of rough there. And I'm like a Zacchaeus, a wee little man, and these guys befriended me. There were two Kevin Ziegelbauer and this other Kevin.
Yeah, right.
And
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they're still here.
When you're short, everybody's a giant. That's the way I feel.
So I'm grateful for them.
Yeah.
Because, God providentially allowed me to hang out with them.
Yeah.
And protect them.
God can use that. Yeah, absolutely. I remember I was a little boy. I think my parents took me to a circus. One time, circus came to town, and there was a giant there, and he was a literal giant. He was 8 feet. And I remember I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and so my parents brought me up to him, and he would talk to people. You know, he was kind of walking around and stuff like that. And I just remember he shook my hand. I was just little. I mean, I'm short now, but I was really short then, you know. But I remember that apparently he was 8 foot because they said he was an actual giant. So you got to be 8 feet to be classified a giant, I guess. So, but I mean, I think some of these guys are 7'8". Some of these basketball players. I mean, to me, that's you're a giant.
Anytime recent, there's a bunch of giants that's right there.
Right. I wonder if they're Canaanites. Well, leftover from the Canaanites. They made their way to America. So, hey, let's have prayer. Father, thank you again for your grace, and thank you for your love for us as your people. Pray you bless the lesson today. We hope we learn and grow through it, and then prepare our hearts now for the worship service, and we pray in Jesus' name.